Even though continuity, at least according to Kyroots, is the refuge of the weak, I fear, knowing how things go around here, I fear that some of you who might be watching this are watching it post you're having watched the previous one. Well, I'm not trying to be offensive, but I just know how some things are, and I know how some people are. So, in that case, what we're left with is some of what we were talking about last time you've already heard if you were watching. And then the parts I was going to talk about tonight, you're going to go, well, I haven't heard it yet. That is not necessarily direct inference that you are part of the weak. I'll leave it to your judgment to decide for yourselves. But we were mentioning how it is that men collectively, and rightfully so, have the utmost confidence and feel most comfortable with the dead. And I don't mean just bodies, but the ideas, the movements, the institutions. And that which is contemporary in the real sense of the word to ordinary minds seems far too frisky. Just a little too pushy. There is, and those of you who are really into continuity, who have watched for several programs, we were also mentioning what seems to be normally referred to as Holy Scriptures, being kind of a real template, if not archetype, of dead ideas, dead institutions. But now trying to round up some of the wagons who may have gone astray over the last few nights into the tight circle, is that there is an individual use then of religion and Holy Scripture. And it comes out like this, that, and you must take this to get any real use out of it in the most symbolic way. But it's as though the individual then says, well, if God's already addressed the matter, then I don't have to think about it. Now, at least you take that as being too slippery, too easy a shot, especially those watching this on TV, because anybody watch this on TV will take a simple shot sure as hell. Probably beg for one. And when not receiving one, will walk out of the room for a second and imagine that they had one. You do not have to be religious. It's not required. But there is this feeling, and take God in the most symbolic form. You can take it, if you're getting that good, as it's the collective thought of man, the collective wisdom of man, the sanity of the humanistic approach. It's all the same thing. Just being a humanist, thus far you don't have to pay 10% of your money into the church. Plus you don't have to go to those damn meetings on Sunday, or Saturday, or Tuesday. So in the widest sense is what God represents to man, whether they know it or not. But in that sense, then you have a more individualistic dependence and use of Holy Scripture. That is, that there is some external authority. You mean right the end of your finger? I don't know. How far can you see? But rather than just being the collective institution of man, and a person saying, well, the church says so, or on the left hand, religion or politics says so, my community, my nation says so. That is the collective weight and use of it. But down to an individual level, and it's very likely that people hearing this have never literally thought this in these words. And it would especially be true, of course, if you grew up in a fine family of atheists, I guess. Is that you've never said, well, if God's already said it, because you could have grown up in such an atmosphere that your family, your whole collective genetic institutions could have been anti-God. It doesn't matter. You have, in effect, because you had no choice individually as part of the genetic growth, you have in effect at the secondary level said to yourself that if this matter has already been addressed, whether you said God or not, because the idea, if it's been addressed external to me, then those doing the addressing, the individual doing the addressing, the institution doing the addressing, is superior to me. You didn't hear tonight, a guy finally asked Kyroot if it was the joke of the day or what, that pointed out that collective thought is always superior to individual thought. And somebody, can you believe a nice, simple, straightforward, obvious, self-evident statement like that, some chowderhead had the nerve to say, is that a joke? Nothing funny about that. So, even though a person may not use the word God, I use it because it is the most efficient, and it is the most telling, and it is the most well used by life throughout the ages. That men are saying, in essence, if superior forces, which if you're a humanist, if you're an atheist, the superior force is the collective wisdom of atheists, of right-thinking people not blinded by outdated religious beliefs. Okay, same thing as God. They just don't know it. It doesn't matter. It's just, again, like I said, they save a few bucks and don't have to go to those damn church services. But it's the same thing. They are saying that external to me, there is something that is wiser. And any human would say that, except maybe a revolutionist. But even Kyroots had his own termitity tonight. And I happen to know for a fact that it's doubtful that he even knows what that means, but he had it. Of pointing out. What was it he pointed out? Well, you know what it was. There is a collective wisdom that the genetic expansion of life, having to do with generations, it has to do with expansion, and things that get too weird even for us to try and talk about directly, but it has to do with the fact that you have no choice other than, at the ordinary level, to believe, to think. And it's more basic than that. If your duodenum could talk to you, it would tell you that yes. It has more to do with that than any kind of theories or politics or religion. And that is that there is greater wisdom than me. Or as I started to say that Kyroots had a rebel point out, or somebody, that we are all, or he pointed out, that we are all sane, ordinary, decent, but all men are born with an intellectual template. And only somebody like a revolutionist or some other kind of nut would try and ignore it. I'm glad to see again that it met, even the retelling of it a second time, met with that same underwhelming reaction. Because you're not supposed to ignore. You're not even supposed to, in the mainstream of life, if you're just an ordinary sane person who can make hand gestures. You're not supposed to not only ignore it, you're not supposed to resist it. Oh, you can resist it a little bit. It's like if you live in a place that the predominating collective thought, in its full sense of the word, was, let's say, conservative Catholic. Because I just made some... Then, that is the way, that is your template. And it did not come, may I point out to you people who just come back from the bathroom out there, it did not come from the locale, it did not come culturally, it did not come from their environment. We don't have time to go into that because anyone who still thinks there's a question between, well, is that environmental or genetic? Then I got no idea why you're watching this show. Yes, I do. It's free. You're probably too lazy to turn it on, but you, may we be frank with one another. You don't know nothing, all right? Be done with that. But it's a hobby being ordinary. Nobody knows anything, so I didn't mean it offensively. We all don't know as much as you do too, so there. But wherever you are, don't get hung on the example. Wherever you are, if you're ordinary, if you're sane, which you should be, you would not, there's nothing in the general makeup of life to make you resist the intellectual template with which you were born. And it is not Catholic, it's not conservative, it's not Jewish, it's not Italian. It just seems to be. That's just minor offshoots, and it keeps things going for one reason. There is a general template, which is, hate to tell you people, it's genetic. As opposed to what? Nothing. That's opposed to what? Unless you're dumb enough or hard enough for a hobby and think, well, wait a minute. Now, we could have a general intellectual template, and some of it could be genetic, such as you're born with a small tumor on your brain. If you're born with a head, you got a tumor on your brain. But for those of you who's never understood it, it's like a fly thinking, where'd this elephant get stuck on the bottom of my foot? You think about it. Well, I can. I have a small elephant on my tumor. It is not the general template to which, may I suggest to you that Kyroot was referring to. The template is not something that is local. All of that is playground, recess talk for children. We're worrying about, well, wait a minute. There are groups of people that seem to have just a natural, just a native, an intrinsic, an indigenous, conservative turn of mind. And those same people that I was just quoting will go, I wonder if there's any part of it perhaps is even genetic. Whatever happened to dictionaries? Men made up dictionaries. Men cause dictionaries, only men can cure them. They will say, well, there seems to be just a native inclination on some people's part to do so and so. Well, in that case, since I disapprove of that, we need to do something about the environmental conditions that obviously cause it. It does make you sometimes wonder, if you took life seriously, if in fact I am developing a tumor on my brain, or perhaps even a brain on my tumor, because that was a little humor. Well, every now and then I hear from people that watch the show and they go, which parts are funny? And I thought... which I'm assuming they meant to ask which parts were intended to be funny, so I thought maybe I should make up a sign somebody and say, funny part. Of course, there's an insider's response to that, and that is, if you think any part of this is serious, you're the joke. That was a parable. Let's try and catch back up for a second. There is literally, even ordinary people would agree, out there does seem to be, they'd go along with it, especially if you insinuate it was a parable, that people are intellectually born with, or they're provided with an intellectual template. Ordinary people go, well, that's true. But then they, as always, and they're supposed to, would drift off into, well, some of it is probably, there could be, if you had some genetic defect, there may be a small place in your brain that you can maybe get a pinched nerve when you're being born and turn you into a Republican or something. Or make you think, I'm Jewish, when you were just an ordinary person until this, some kind of damage. Or, my God, I'm an Albanian, which, originally the man was not. He was a decent Bulgarian. And something happened. But at any rate, they would say, yes, there seems to be a certain proclivity for people to think in a certain way. But then, as always, they fall into, I wonder, we should do studies on that. Now, some of it I can identify. This guy does seem to be acting an awfully lot like an Albanian, I'll grant you that. But how much does that have to do with the fact that his mother and father were Albanian? But other than that, where did he go to school and what kind of nourishment or lack thereof did he have growing up as a youngster? Was he allowed to play? Did they let, since he's a boy Albanian, or says he is, was he allowed to express his feminine side? Was he allowed to get naked and go join a man's encounter group and go woo-ha, or what is it? At any rate, they would end up in the hobby of debating within themselves. But then they apparently do it with others. But, well, how much is this? This is the same people that says, yes, there seems to be a natural, native, indigenous. And then go, well, but how much is being an Albanian is environmental? I'm sorry, I'll stiff upper lip and try to press on. There is this template. And anyone who does not, this is really inside, or you people watching TV, since it's free, you just choke on it. Face up. Anybody who believes that this template, this inclination to think a certain way, anybody who believes, well, this is brought on by the environment and there's no doubt, or some part of it is, just some little part, you might as well face it, you have the world's grandest, most widespread hobby, you're ordinary. That's it. You'll never see any more. And you're not supposed to. Because if men did not in general believe that, if that was not the way life runs the hot energy into men's beliefs, we would all be in a shell of a heap. So everyone else is supposed to believe it, and it is a continuing hobby. It's one of the most individual localized hobbies that there has been over the discussion. Well, how much of what we are is truly tied and dependent upon just our genes, and how much is not? Talk about a hobby. I mean, you're never going down to that post office and them say, well, we don't have any new stamps. Sorry. All you got to do, you can go back to the well and it's never dry. You go back and people, and you can even see it. Some of you, I shouldn't be this dirty, but what the hell? I know for a fact some of you have seen, without any doubt, just that there is no such thing as the environment. What everybody else calls the environment, your environment is everybody else's genetics. And you just see it. I mean, it's no doubt. But notice, the template is so strong, that is, you're so alive and human, you can see it and turn right around and suddenly be saying, do you have a new 29-cent that maybe shows wildlife? In other words, you'll turn right around and you'll be discussing with somebody, and you'll say, well, and you'll be discussing somebody, some famous figure, or some movement, something in your neighborhood, and you'll say, well, we shouldn't blame the people because, look, the goddamn conditions under which they grew up. And it sounds just as straightforward, it sounds enlightened, it sounds intelligent. But in a moment of revolutionary lucidity, you know that it's just childish babble. It's just a hobby. You're just saying, well, is that a new stamp? Have they changed the color of the stamp? Have they moved the denomination over to another corner? So, back to where we were, really? No one but some kind of nut would try and resist the template. Now, other people think they do. But what I was going to say, their form of rebellion is, all right, I am a Roman Catholic conservative Albanian. I'm going to tell you what. I'm nobody's fool. Sometimes, when our president, when the head of our Roman Albanian conservative church goes down the street, sometimes to myself, or maybe sometimes I'll be with some friends and I'll go, I don't know about him. I assume you get it. It's like the bravest man in the world. And when God turns his back and you go, that is not, of course, not physically, that's not the point. That is the amount of intellectual, personal, originality, rebellion in life. But that's all that's possible. That's all that you're supposed to do. It's when God turns his back, or the president, after you've been invited to lunch, or at least allowed to live in the same city where the mayor lives, and one day he goes by and he kind of nods, and you slobber and you grovel, or you smile back. You don't have to take that in some kind of real psychopathic way. But it's just God walks by. That is the collective wisdom of your time, your place. The collective wisdom of humanity. Western civilization happens to walk past where you're staying on the corner, and it nods to you. The whole of Western civilization. And you nod back. But, hey, you're not just another face in the crowd. Just another pea in the pod of life. So, when Western civilization gets by, you turn to somebody and go, but then you look, see if it's looking back over its shoulder. If it is, rightfully you go, you're supposed to. And at least any of you, which I'm sure none of my here presently in person would, if you would take that as actually being an interplay between people, a dance between you and life, look at inside of you. You do it to you. You do it from the primary to the secondary level. You do it from the assembly line, from labor to management. You continually are doing it. Continually. You're supposed to. It is part of the movement of energy. It is part of what keeps you alive, is you do it to you. Which one of the Kyroots point out to a revolutionist mind, that which is familiar is already too familiar. But nobody else realizes that. The ordinary mind does not. Because it takes, back to, we can change parables as fast as anybody. Western civilization goes by, it's like familiar thoughts. In an ordinary mind, it's bravo. It's coup de maître of a revolutionist act is to its own thoughts, is it thinks something. You gotta listen. You do it all the time, you just don't know, nobody's ever thought about it this way. But it's like you hear a denunciation of some religion, some political system, and you go, ha! I couldn't have said it better. And it may be the predominant religion or political structure where you live. And then to your brain, to you. And you don't look at it this way. You think you're addressing somebody else. What you think you've done is go to you. Just on the basis, well, I already thought that. That's rebellion. Or you can call it that, of course. But does it change anything in a person's thinking? No. Is it supposed to? Well, certainly not. But if that's what you're attempting to do, as minutely as may be the possibility of actually changing what you are, which somebody even suspected you might have to actually affect the hormones and enzymes in your own body, but God knows we don't even think about that. And then the collective wisdom of man says, oh, heavens no. That's why we have a brain. That's what makes us so. That's what makes us so in charge, is that we are malleable. We can affect our own destinies. We're captains of our, don't say fate. Chartering our own course. Yes, I cannot affect that much that I'm only 5'4", and so I can't be 6 foot tall. But by God, I can do this. I grew up around a bunch of narrow-minded, conservative-thinking Albanians, since I am Albanian. The furthest that any of my family ever went to school, no, it wasn't the second grade. 2 blocks near the school was the closest they ever got. So I may not be able to be a 6 foot tall Albanian, but I can do this. Because the uniqueness of the human mind and spirit and etc. is I can change this. I can go to school. I can become an accountant. Or whatever Albanians do for fun. There is that belief. It is the belief that the template can be changed a little. But if you said, wait a minute, and if I talked long enough and I had the right kind of Albanian or even an accountant, I might get them to see for a split second that, wait, trying to change what you are. Yeah, I can go get an education, and I can get smart, learned. I can pass exams and get a state license in some particular field, accounting, law, medicine. I can do all that. But you know, that's correct. As far as the way I think, just take an exceptional person, it would take a person having an exceptional moment of lucidity. They'd have to go, the way I think, I am now a doctor. I am now a brain surgeon. I am now important and I have a Mercedes. I am respected. But now that you mention it, personally, I'm off duty. Just sitting around by myself back in the bathroom having coffee, up here, what I think, what I sort of am, other than being a doctor with a Mercedes, you made me feel it. It's not just remember it, I can feel it. What I think, what I am here, is not that much different than I was when I was 7 years old. But you can't do that to an ordinary person. When that does happen, every now and then it happens, it's an anomaly in life. What do they do with them? They find that guy and his kid, and they go to the happy farm. Because that is not normal. A man who is now, and not be, of course, a doctor or anything you want to pick out, just an ordinary, decent, upright citizen, a grown person. If what I'm saying is fairly accurate, and that here, what ordinary people call their individuality, that the person is not that much different than they were when they were 12 years old, 7 years old. What would that do to a person? It would send them to a farm. It would serve no purpose, so I'm, of course, not encouraging it if I could. But if it is true, then what does that tell you about the template of general life, about the idea that I can change? The idea of ordinary people rebelling, trying to push the envelope of their consciousness, or whatever the latest phrase is a hobby. It's saying, you mean there are no new wildlife stamps out this month? Well, I'm going to write the postmaster a letter and tell him I disapprove. There is your intellectual rebellion. There is the safety, the confines, the comfortable, the safety net of the genetic expansion of humanity. So who, but whatever this revolution is that we keep talking about, who but that or some kind of other nut, to quote Kyroots, would try and struggle against it? If an ordinary mind struggled against it and could succeed at all, it would have committed a form of suicide. It would have been, first that guy who said what he liked about, who wrote in last time, that he liked about Kyroots was that it could be taken in more than one way. That was too funny to ever laugh about, which, of course, some of you realize. Does it tape absolutely out? Or are we playing? If change was possible, what I was going to say was the kind of revolution, kind of expansion that a person thinks they're doing is no more than kind of sticking their tongue out at whatever the prevailing wisdom is, the collective wisdom. But if they could actually stick it out, if they could change their mind, they would have committed a form of suicide. And the Kyroots that I was going to refer to said that if, I'm changing it so don't, in a sense, if you could struggle against the collective wisdom, if you could in some way free yourself from the intellectual template with which everyone is provided, which is not psychological, since there is no psychological. Since it is not that, if you could change it, you would have actually become a kind of active participant in your own execution. And who would do that but an idiot? I mean, you would have to say to the firing squad or the general in charge, well, should I get over so the sun's behind their back? I'm afraid your guys can't see me good, you know. You may stand up on a box. You may, swell my, maybe if I turn, give you a profile, you get a better shot. Who but an idiot would do that? Now, of course, an ordinary person cannot do that. But all the belief that people have, people who believe they're pursuing some kind of exotic or metaphysical course of thought or theory, you're studying cemeteries, you're studying the past, and the rebellion is you trying to look at contemporary times, which seem to many people, to some people, a bit too frisky, specifically here. And so they always look to the past, to religion. And just when contemporary time seems to have yawned or look off for a second, you go, that's it. But it's safe. Who wants to be safe other than those who want to be sane? And was that rotund? Profound. I was close. Words of wisdom. Having not at one time tonight, if you notice, pronounced the word and as though a B had replaced an N. We will bid you adieu, auf Wiedersehen, ciao. And spit in your beer and go.